Good afternoon. I'm the newcomer to this party. As Tom Savage has talked about, I was an old comer. There was a day back in the 1978, I guess it was, 77, 78, that you had that odd combination of me and Ron Hurst and Tom Savage in the buildings together at Colonial Williamsburg. They've not talked about stories that we could tell out of that, and we still can't talk about those today. But that was a relationship that certainly helped to shape my career, my years at Colonial Williamsburg and at William & Mary. But then I went away. I went to other parts of the country and started to look at really the same issues that we're talking about today, just in totally different contexts. I was last at MESDA in 1988 before I got a phone call one day just totally out of the blue from Sally Gant, who didn't even give me a chance to breathe, as she quickly started to talk to me about I had to come and do the Summer Institute and be the resident scholar. And as soon as I could get a chance to ask Sally, why, how, why are you calling me? She finally said, well, Robert Hicks. So I want to acknowledge Robert Hicks right now. He's been my collaborator on many projects in Tennessee. And if the new directions, if anything that I brought to MESDA in the last 4 years, it all started with Robert. So Robert, thank you. Thank you for bringing me to this party, because this is a very special occasion. And you've already heard from all the superstars of the importance of this institution and what it has meant to the South, to the nation, to the whole world of decorative arts scholarship. And my job is to sort of emphasize a point that's already been looked at in some ways, but the publication series that MESDA was devoted to at the very beginning and has had a lasting impact as well. Now you can begin that, of course, as everyone has today, with stories of Frank Horton. Again, I'm the newcomer. I never knew Frank Horton, but I do respect the scholarly tradition he began, because the big arc that you can start to see at MESDA's publications is the shift from connoisseurship to scholarship. And in fact, that was really the method that Horton had, along with his cohorts, John Bivens, Brad Rauschenberg, that if you're going to put the downs of these worlds down for good, you had to do it with facts, because they would never accept that the South was anywhere near an equal of their beloved institutions and their beloved craftsman traditions. You had to do it with facts. So they started to dig deep, and they started to dig consistently. You can really see the sort of handiwork here of an archaeologist and Brad's, his own discipline, on how they approached this. Very thorough, very detailed oriented. What we try to teach students today, it's that ability to look close and then look closer at what you're seeing in front of you, and then back up and look around you, not just in the house, not just in the neighborhood, but maybe in that county, that state, then that region. The way to look in and then to pull back and start to think about what these objects mean in different ways. So that is a scholarly tradition that Horton and his colleagues launched, and it still shapes so many of these publications. And what impresses me is how they always had a sort of missionary quality to them. We published anywhere and everywhere. There could be their own Old Salem magazine. It could be in different magazines. It could be in different journals. It could be in different catalogs. It could be at different symposiums. They understood how they had to make a statement through not only the objects they were collecting, but in the questions that they were asking of those objects. And then you got to the period of really sort of breakthrough books. And this is where everyone's talked about influences, but I think both Robert Hicks and I could talk about at some length the influence of this study by our friend Ben Caldwell. I mean, it was the first really serious study of any type of material culture in Tennessee, outside of some of the early Native American material culture studies that came out of the Tennessee Valley's flooding of the Tennessee Valley in the 1930s. You had those, but you really didn't have anything in the decorative arts. And it started to get, I think, a lot of historians, collectors, museum people thinking a little bit more about their collection and maybe starting to realize that the region's history was more than those 4 years between 1861 and 1865. So, you know, as a historian, this is where I see the influence of the publication series being so important. Now, there's many. The Moravian Potter's book by Bivens. Bivens' work is very interesting to me. He was so broad in what he could understand and write about persuasively. And this is part of the art of history as well. Not only do you identify and assess and categorize, but you've got to analyze, and then you've got to communicate. The Moravian Potters was one such attempt. Of course, then there was the magnificent furniture of coastal North Carolina. You know, this book, which came out in 1988, you know, the last time I came to MESDA, my wife and I, Mary Hofschwelle, who had been part of the Colonial Williamsburg group back in the day, we came and bought copies of this book. We each bought a copy because it was like, well, you know, we knew we would be using this. And again, how these books started to shape other historians, because both Mary and I have actually spent most of our time looking at post-1865 South in a very different way. But again, this scholarship is informing the work that we're doing, because it's demanding you to combine another big arc here, words and things. This is probably the most important contribution I think all of this research effort at MESDA has accomplished. We're forcing historians to think about words and things. If you want to paint a picture of the culture, of a region, of a nation, you've got to use all the evidence at hand. And MESDA continues to just publish that evidence. I mean, the quality of scholarship of furniture of North Carolina was sort of one benchmark. And then 15 years later, you have the wholly different benchmark of the monumental 3-volume study of Charleston furniture. Again, as Ron talked about, in 1955, there had been the last major study of Southern furniture. And I can remember those days back in Williamsburg when everyone knew Wallace Guzzler was working on that book and thinking, well, this will be way cool once it gets out because we finally have something new. Well, then you take what this book accomplishes. It looked at Charleston comprehensively and began to open the door that some scholars were starting to understand, but I think these guys kicked the door open. And that was, Charleston is Southern, but it's also Caribbean. And it's really part of a larger Caribbean world that the South was very much part of. And you've got to understand those influences and that give and take to interpret what you see before us. And this introduces a degree of internationalism into our understanding of the South that is always missing. People are always talking about Southerners are so provincial. They're so parochial. You know, I know. But at the same time, the South was a very much at the sort of edge of a lot of international trade, a lot of international networks. It wasn't just a region that was east to west. It was north to south, south to north, and then coming out of New Orleans and some of those Native American cultures to the west, it was also west to east. And then south to farther south, down into the Caribbean. And that's what you started to really grasp in some of the scholarship emerging at this time. So, these books by Bivens and Rauschenberg are very important. If you don't have them, you need to get them because they are pivotal to our understanding of not only what MESDA has accomplished, but where we are in understanding the history of the South today. Now, since then, of course, the contributions everyone has talked about, some of these major books that MESDA either co-published or sponsored or really provided the means of publishing. And it's a wide range. It's not only furniture, it's also painting. And then it's also the quilts and coverlets book, the textiles, and then also the very interesting book about, hey, you guys who are into maybe building your own Southern furniture, let us give you some detailed drawings of what that was about. So, again, a range of scholarship to a range of audiences. That is something I think is very important about MESDA's publication series. It wasn't just for specialists. It just wasn't for dilettantes. It just wasn't for social historians. Wasn't just for art historians. It was for a broad range of people. And as this serious book-length studies are going on, they're still publishing constantly in the Old Salem magazine and in other types of more popular press magazines and journals, their findings and who they are and what they were doing. That's spreading the message to a larger audience that I think sometimes we forget to do. We can all talk here among ourselves. We need to be talking to others as well. And that brings us back into the Summer Institute and how this scholarly tradition is really shaping that institution today. Now, it's important to understand that the students of the 21st century, they're coming in with totally different sort of attitudes, questions, opinions, some informed, some not informed at all. And it's sort of our duty to get them back to thinking about words and things, that they need to have the great evidence of the Craftsman database, all types of other primary sources, but that the landscape, the architecture, the decorative arts, those are primary documents too. That if they want to really start to reshape scholarship, they've got to think in those terms. And we still do it through the time-tested method of taking them to places. I've already been sort of kidded in this last 2 days that there's no limit to where I want to take students, and that's almost sort of true. In fact, they made a big mistake by letting Ralph Harvard and I start to hang out together, because we both think it's perfectly logical to do 8 to 8 fieldwork days and take in 15 to 20 places. This is just sort of how it's done. And I do sort of take a perverse joy in seeing these 20-year-old students just, sort of panting like dogs after trying to keep up with us 60-year-old guys. But, part of that is also conveying to them the passion and excitement of seeing up close and seeing with your own eyes some of the things that maybe they have read in the scholarship. So it's introducing them to those ideas, that technique, that looking close is so crucial, and it's influenced a lot of good recent work. I mean, if you haven't looked at any of Lewis Nelson's work, who comes right out at the preface of this great study of Charleston churches, to admit he got excited about this topic during one of the field visits during Summer Institute. And of course, you can talk to Betsy about not only her work on Shearer, but her experience with the Institute, both as a student and also coming in the last time we did the backcountry. She was gracious to come over and talk about Shearer's work to the students of today. And then I have one of my own students, Amber Clausen, who was at MTSU planning to do a good dissertation topic. She comes to MESDA. She gets transformed as Tom Savage read her quote. And she ends up doing a pivotal new study of East Tennessee furniture before 1800 and pointing out that the shop that she studied in Greene in Washington County was the biggest industrial concern of that county at the time. And there's a whole lot of us who went like, well, we didn't know any of this stuff. And that was because, again, she was combining words and things. And another student of mine, Jessica White, did the same thing with a Tennessee long rifle, an artifact long with stories in Tennessee, but actual scholarship that tells you something. Now, Amber's work became her dissertation. Jessica's work became an article in the Journal of Backcountry Studies. So again, I wouldn't say that Robert Leith has sort of laid down the guideline of publish or perish, but he sort of has, and I think that's good, because that is something we're really pushing these students to, that they need to add to the scholarly literature, because they have new insights, they have different perspectives, and some of you have heard these guys at Forum, and here's three of them from a couple of years ago: Catherine Carlisle, who's here; Grant, who's already been acknowledged; Nathan, who is not Nathan Jones, but he's at Bayou Bend, and we've talked about the good work now taking place at Bayou Bend. So again, their scholarship is getting out there and helping to shape this new sort of publication era that we're entering. Now, Gary Albert and what he's done with the help of all of these members of the editorial board, and it's one of the most distinguished listings of scholars in decorative arts and material culture I've ever seen. What this electronic journal is doing is really important, because not only is it accessible, and once you get things accessible through the internet, more and more scholars will use it, particularly historians, because historians are basically lazy, and they want to just go to an archive or go to digital collections. They don't go out and do field research. That's what I mean by being lazy. They're not really lazy. They just don't have that sort of dual purpose that some of us do. And this is invaluable for them. And I can't give enough kudos to MESDA for launching this, and for Gary for overseeing it and making it possible. It's always good to have these brilliant ideas, but to actually execute them, particularly in the digital world, can be daunting. And Gary and his contributors here on the editorial board have done a great job. And then in my own time of teaching the Summer Institute from 2012 to the present, there has been the revolution I've already commented on the Research Center. You're out of the basement and into the light. Praise God, they're in the light. And not only does this give the students a better attitude that they're not buried somewhere in the dark and dingy basement, but also it's just a great staff. Kim May is doing a great job there. June Lucas oversees all of this. And it gets into another basic message that is taking place at MESDA, and that is this concept of collaboration. Now, this is something that no one's really talked, I think, to my mind, enough about today: collaboration. There is tremendous collaboration among the curators, the scholars that come in to visit during Summer Institute to talk about their works. There's tremendous sort of give and take about the books and articles that they're reading as we try to get them to engage in the scholarship. But boy, that takes a lot of work. That takes people like Jenny Garwood sitting here explaining how to use just technology to go do some searching. We always assume the guys under 30 know how to do all of this stuff. They don't. You have to teach them how to do research and how to dig deep into sources. And you put together collaboration, words and things. That whole shift from connoisseurship into scholarship, looking close. Folks, we're in a brave new world. And it's a world that still is a bit scary for people, but that is the challenge that we sort of face. And the challenge in my mind is pretty straightforward. We have to continue with field research, be it in cemeteries, be it listening to Kareem Daly there on Sapelo Island last summer, be it digging deep into those archives. and really blending together words and things with an object-centered focus to make a contribution to scholarship. And this is our challenge as well. We have to almost save history from the historians. And I say that as a historian. I mean, good grief. I got appointed the Tennessee State Historian. So, that means I guess I'm a historian. But I always would like to think instead, I'm sort of like an explorer. I'm trying to, I'm so privileged. People will share their things with me. They'll share their stories. And the sort of thing you have to give back to them is your ability to dive into archives and find the words that start to give greater meaning to those things, to ennoble those things into real primary sources that we as scholars can study and write books and make our contributions to scholarship, but that owners, collectors, can prize themselves because they are beginning to understand that the decorative arts are far more than beautiful objects. They're objects that document who we are as a culture and as a nation. They are the things that make us Southerners, that make us Americans. And every time you reach back and pick up one of those objects and start to look at it, think about it, talk about it with others, and then use scholarship to explore maybe even additional meanings, you begin to think that the past might be called a foreign country, but it is a past that we can still go and touch and give us hope for the future. So we're here with challenges today. I will place before you this tremendous range of scholarship that was produced by MESDA. And I will leave this whole audience with one more challenge. Being the newcomer, I understand the need y'all have to celebrate your roots and talk about the past and go back to Mr. Downs and his ignorant comment in 1949. But I would say that day is done. You're ready to launch into a new day of scholarship, where you talk about not just one South, but many Souths, where you talk about how diversity is not some new Southern thing, but it's at the root of Southern culture and identity, and that you remind everyone that without the things that we have been privileged to keep, and those who keep them, we don't understand the words that the past left us today. You're on that brave new world. Embrace it, live it. And with that, I want to introduce the greatest collaborator I've ever had the pleasure of working with. This guy, y'all praised him some. In my opinion, you can't praise him enough. He's one of the greatest Southern historians I've ever met, Robert Leith.